The dust motes danced in the single beam of late afternoon sun slanting through the blinds, illuminating a world that was supposed to be asleep. Eleanor Vance stood in the doorway of her son's bedroom, a space she hadn't truly entered in months. Not really. She'd knock, call his name, leave clean laundry in a basket by the door, but she had respected the invisible boundary he'd erected around his life, the one that came with being 18, on the cusp of leaving for a world that would be entirely his own. She had called it respecting his privacy. Now, a cold dread coiling in her stomach told her she had called it the wrong thing. She had called it trust, when perhaps it had been a willful blindness. The room was neat, almost clinically so. Books on macroeconomics and political theory were stacked precisely on his desk. His debate team trophy gleamed on the shelf, a golden figure frozen in a silent, triumphant argument. On the wall, his acceptance letter from Georgetown was framed, the centerpiece of a shrine to a future she had meticulously helped build. Every object was a testament, a piece of evidence in the case for Liam Vance, the perfect son. But her hand was trembling, clutching a small, heavy object that belonged to none of it. A burner phone. She had found it tucked deep inside a shoebox at the back of his closet, nestled amongst old running shoes he hadn't worn in years. She had been looking for a box to store winter blankets, a mundane Saturday chore that had just shattered her universe. The phone was cheap, plasticky, anonymous. Beside it, wrapped in a rubber band, was a stack of cash. Not $20 bills from an ATM, but crisp, sequential $100 bills. Thousands of them. And beneath that, a small black moleskine notebook. Her fingers, numb and clumsy, opened it. The pages weren't filled with journal entries or class notes. They were filled with columns of numbers, cryptic acronyms, and dates. Strings of characters that looked like digital wallet addresses. Names she didn't recognize next to figures that made her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't the ledger of a teenager saving up for a car. This was the language of a secret life, a language she could not speak but whose meaning she felt in the sudden, icy hollowness in her chest. Every line of ink was a stone thrown at the stained glass window of their family, and the beautiful, perfect image was cracking, splintering, threatening to collapse into a million sharp, unrecognizable pieces. Who was her son? Who was the boy who slept in this room, who ate at her dinner table, who hugged her goodnight? The silence of the house pressed in on her, thick and suffocating. The golden trophy on the shelf seemed to mock her, its polished surface reflecting a distorted, terrified stranger who looked just like her. This was the moment before the sound. The moment the lightning strikes, and you are still waiting, breath held, for the thunder that will tear the sky and your life apart. To understand the depth of that fracture, you have to understand the life it broke. The Vance family lived on a quiet, tree-lined street in Northwood, a suburb where the lawns were uniformly green and the ambitions were uniformly high. Their house was a handsome colonial, painted a tasteful slate gray with crisp white trim. In the spring, Eleanor's prize-winning hydrangeas bloomed in vibrant bursts of blue and pink along the flagstone path. It was a house that spoke of order, of stability, of success. It was a physical manifestation of the life Eleanor had painstakingly curated. She had given up her career in marketing to become the architect of their family, and her masterpiece, her magnum opus, was Liam. From the moment he was born, she had seen in him a vessel for all the hopes she had for herself, refined and perfected. David, her husband, was a partner in a downtown accounting firm. He was a good man, steady and reliable, a man who saw the world in black and white, in assets and liabilities. He loved his son, but his love was a quiet, supportive presence, a foundation upon which Eleanor built the grander structure. It was Eleanor who managed the tutors, the extracurriculars, the summer internships. It was Eleanor who rehearsed college interview questions with Liam in the car, who edited his application essays until they shone with a preternatural polish. She saw his potential as a precious, raw material that she was uniquely qualified to shape. Her friends marveled at her dedication. "You've done such an amazing job with him, Eleanor," they would say at book club over glasses of Chardonnay, and Eleanor would smile, a practiced, humble smile that concealed a fierce, roaring pride. Liam was not just her son. He was her vindication. He was proof that her choices, her sacrifices, had been worth it. The family photos that lined the hallway told a story of flawless progression. Liam as a gap-toothed little leaguer, his uniform still impossibly white. Liam in his middle school band uniform, holding a saxophone he played with technical precision but little passion. Liam on the stage at a model UN conference, looking impossibly adult in a borrowed suit. And the most recent one, taken on the day he received his Georgetown acceptance. The three of them stood on the front porch, beaming. David's arm was around Eleanor's shoulder, his smile content. Eleanor was looking at Liam, her face radiant with a love so bright it was almost painful. And Liam was smiling too. It was the same smile he had in every picture. A perfect, camera-ready smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. It was a detail Eleanor had never noticed until now, as she stood frozen in his bedroom. Now, looking back, she saw it everywhere. A subtle, constant reservation. A shadow in the frame. He was a boy who had learned to perform perfection so well that no one had ever thought to ask if he was happy. They had only ever asked if he was succeeding. And by every metric they had established for him, he was captain of the debate team, an activity he excelled at, his arguments precise, logical, and devastatingly effective. He volunteered at a local soup kitchen on weekends, an experience he wrote about with moving eloquence in his college essays. His GPA was a stratospheric 40. He was polite to his elders, kind to his younger cousins, and never, ever caused them a moment of worry. He was, in every conceivable way, the son they had raised him to be. The weight of that perfection must have been immense, but it was a weight they had placed upon him, piece by piece, year by year, celebrating each added burden as another accomplishment. They had built him a pedestal, and he had learned to stand on it without wobbling, without ever letting on that the height might be making him dizzy. The life they had was not a lie, not exactly. The love was real. The pride was real. But it was all built on a shared, unspoken agreement, to only look at the surface because the surface was beautiful and the alternative was unthinkable. The first tremors were so slight they were easy to ignore, to rationalize away. They were the ordinary signs of a teenager pulling away, testing the boundaries of his impending adulthood. It started with the doors. For years, Liam's bedroom door was always open, an invitation for conversation, for connection. Then, sometime in his junior year, it began to close. At first, just when he was studying. Then, more and more often until it was closed by default. When Eleanor would knock, there would be a pause, a faint shuffling sound, before his voice, slightly strained, would call out, "Yeah." She told herself it was normal. He needed to concentrate. He was growing up. Then came the late nights. Studying with the debate group, he'd say, texting her from an unknown number because his phone died, or working on a coding project with Mark. The excuses were always plausible, always tied to the academic excellence they so prized. But he would come home long after she and David were in bed, the soft click of the front door echoing in the silent house. In the morning, he would be pale, with dark circles under his eyes that no amount of sleep seemed to erase. Eleanor would place a mug of coffee in front of him and fuss over his breakfast. "Are you pushing yourself too hard, honey? Georgetown is in the bag, you can relax a little." He would just smile that placid, distant smile. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a lot to wrap up before graduation." His reassurances were like a balm, soothing the nascent anxiety she felt. She wanted to believe him so badly that she made herself believe him. David, less prone to emotional reasoning, was the first to voice a concrete concern. "Did you see Liam's new laptop?" he asked one evening, as they cleaned up after dinner. "It's a top-of-the-line model. Must have cost a fortune." Eleanor waved it off. "He said he used his savings. You know how frugal he is. All that money from his summer job at the law firm." But David frowned, drying a plate with methodical strokes. "I know what we paid him. It wouldn't have been enough for that, not even close. And the headphones he wears? Those are professional grade. For $100, easy." A flicker of unease went through Eleanor, but she pushed it down. Maybe his grandparents gave him some money for his birthday. It was a weak explanation, and they both knew it. The most jarring incident involved Chloe, Liam's girlfriend of 2 years. She was a lovely girl, bright and warm, and Eleanor had imagined her being part of their family for a long time. Then, one afternoon, Chloe had shown up at the door in tears. Liam had broken up with her, abruptly and without explanation. Eleanor had sat with her in the living room, a box of tissues between them, trying to understand. "It's like he's not even there anymore," Chloe sobbed, her words punctuated by hiccuping breaths. "He's always on his computer in his room with the door locked. When we're together, he's distant, always checking his phone. A different phone, a cheap-looking one. He hides it when I come near. He says I'm being paranoid, but he's lying, Eleanor. I know he is. There's a part of him he keeps locked away, and it's getting bigger. It's like it's eating the rest of him at the time." Eleanor had seen it as the dramatic heartbreak of a teenage girl. She had comforted Chloe, but in her heart, she had defended her son. He was under pressure. He was focused on his future. This was just a casualty of his ambition. She had chosen the story she preferred, the one that kept her world intact. Looking back, she realized Chloe hadn't been describing a breakup. She had been describing a disappearance. She had been sounding an alarm that Eleanor had deliberately, willfully, refused to hear. The ground beneath Eleanor's feet began to feel less solid when David brought his spreadsheets to the dinner table. It was a Tuesday night, a few weeks before she would find the phone in the closet. Liam was out, supposedly at a final review session for his AP government exam. David, who tracked their family finances with the same meticulous detail he applied to his corporate clients, laid a printout next to Eleanor's plate. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice low and serious. He had highlighted a series of small, regular withdrawals from their main checking account. $50 here, $100 there, all from ATMs far from their usual routes. "And look at this," he said, pointing to another section. "The grocery bills. They're consistently higher, but our habits haven't changed. I think he's getting cash back, small amounts here and there." Hoping we wouldn't notice, Eleanor stared at the numbers, a knot tightening in her gut. "It can't be," she whispered. "Liam wouldn't steal from us." "I'm not saying he's stealing, not exactly," David said carefully, choosing his words. "I'm saying money is moving in ways I can't account for. It's been happening for months. It's subtle, but it's systematic." He looked at her, his eyes filled with a worry he could no longer conceal. "Combine that with the new laptop, the expensive gadgets. Where is the money coming from, Eleanor? And where is it going?" The conversation they had that night was their first real argument about Liam. Eleanor was defensive, protective. She accused David of being suspicious, of not trusting their son. "He's a good kid, David. He's never given us a single reason to doubt him. Until now," David countered, his voice firm but pained. "Ignoring this won't make it go away. We need to talk to him." They waited for him to come home. The hours ticked by. 10 o'clock became 11, then midnight. Eleanor's anger and defensiveness slowly evaporated, replaced by a cold, creeping fear. When Liam finally walked in at 12:30, he looked exhausted but also strangely energized, a wired, brittle quality in his eyes. They sat him down at the kitchen table, the financial spreadsheets laid out between them like an indictment. "Liam, we need to talk about this," David began, his tone even. Liam's eyes flickered over the papers. His posture didn't change. His expression remained placid. There was no flicker of surprise, no guilt. There was nothing. It was like watching a placid lake, with no hint of the churning currents below. "What about it?" he asked, his voice calm. "It's just some withdrawals. I needed cash for things. Study guides, group dinners. $800 for a study guide?" David pressed. "An extra $60 in cash back from the grocery store every week?" Liam shrugged, a gesture of nonchalant dismissal that was profoundly infuriating. "It adds up. You know how expensive things are." He was a master of deflection, a skill honed over years on the debate team. He could take any argument, any piece of evidence, and twist it until it seemed plausible, reasonable. He turned to Eleanor, his expression softening, playing to her instinct to protect him. "Mom, you know I wouldn't do anything wrong. I've been so stressed with finals. I just haven't been keeping track of my spending. I'm sorry. I'll pay you back." He was so convincing, so earnest. He was the son she knew, the one she had raised. Eleanor found her resolve wavering. She looked at David, a silent plea in her eyes. "Let it go. Let's just believe him." But David held his ground. "It's not just about the money, Liam. It's about the secrecy. It's about the things that don't add up. We're worried about you," for the first time. A flash of something hard and cold crossed Liam's face. It was anger, a deep, controlled fury that was more frightening than any outburst. "Worried about what?" he said, his voice dropping. "That I'm not living up to the plan? Don't worry. I'm checking all the boxes. The grades are perfect. The acceptance letter is on the wall. What more do you want?" He stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'm going to bed. I have an exam tomorrow." He walked away, leaving them in a stunned, heavy silence. He hadn't confessed. He hadn't denied. He had simply shut the conversation down, leaving them with more questions than answers, and the terrifying realization that their son was a stranger living in their house. That conversation was the catalyst. It was the moment Eleanor's willful blindness began to fail her. The seed of doubt, once planted, began to sprout, its roots pushing through the carefully tended soil of her beliefs. The next few weeks were a quiet agony. She watched Liam with a new, painful intensity. She saw the way his fingers were constantly, almost subconsciously, tapping against his leg, as if inputting a code only he knew. She noticed the second he would come home, he would go straight to his room and the faint, rhythmic click of a keyboard would start, sometimes continuing late into the night. He was more withdrawn than ever, his presence in the house feeling more like a ghost's than a son's. He ate his meals quickly, his eyes fixed on his phone. His real phone, the sleek smartphone they paid for, and answered their questions in monosyllables. The easy affection that had once defined their relationship was gone, replaced by a tense, fragile courtesy. It was a Saturday. David was at the office, catching up on work, and Liam was, predictably, locked in his room. The house felt unnaturally still. Driven by a desperate, gnawing need to do something, Eleanor decided to tackle the storage closet in the upstairs hallway. It was a chore she'd been putting off, a way to impose order on at least one small corner of her chaotic world. It was while she was looking for an empty box that she remembered the old shoeboxes in Liam's closet. He wouldn't mind, she told herself. It was just an old box. Her heart pounded as she opened his bedroom door. The room was empty. A note on his desk said he'd gone to the library. The air was stale, lifeless. She went to his closet, the scent of his laundry detergent, a scent she had known for years, offering a strange, false comfort. At the very back, behind a row of neatly hung shirts, was a stack of shoeboxes. She pulled one down. It was heavier than it should have been. And that was when she found it all. The burner phone, the cash, the notebook, the world tilted on its axis. The vague, formless anxieties of the past few months coalesced into a single, sharp point of terror. This was not teenage rebellion. This was not academic pressure. This was something else entirely. Something dark and dangerous and utterly alien. She sank to the floor, the cold plastic of the phone in one hand, the damning notebook in the other. The boy with the perfect grades, the debate trophies, the Georgetown acceptance, that boy was a fiction, a carefully crafted character, and the author was standing right in front of them, refusing to show them the real story. When David came home, he found her sitting at the kitchen table, the phone, the money, and the notebook laid out like evidence at a crime scene. She didn't need to say a word. The look on her face, a mask of hollowed-out shock, told him everything. He picked up the notebook, his accountant's eyes scanning the columns of numbers and codes. He didn't understand the specifics, but he understood the pattern. This was a business, a hidden, illicit business. They waited for Liam in silence, the air thick with unspoken fear. When he walked in, whistling softly, a library book under his arm, The sight of them at the table with his secret life exposed on its surface stopped him cold. The color drained from his face. For a single, fleeting second, he looked like a terrified little boy. Then the mask snapped back into place. The calm, impenetrable facade. "What is this?" he asked, his voice steady. "You went through my things. Don't you dare." David's voice was a low growl, all pretense of calm gone. "Don't you dare try to turn this on us. What is this, Liam? What in God's name have you gotten yourself into?" Liam looked from the evidence on the table to his father's furious face, to his mother's shattered one. He seemed to be running calculations, assessing the damage, formulating a strategy. The debater, looking for an angle. He took a breath. "It's not what it looks like." Eleanor let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. "Not what it looks like. Liam, there is thousands of dollars in cash and a secret phone. What is it supposed to look like?" And so he began to lie. Not a full denial, but a carefully constructed, minimized version of the truth. He told them he'd gotten into online gambling, poker sites. He said he was good at it, that he'd won big, but that it had gotten out of hand. The money was his winnings. The notebook was to track his bets. The phone was to keep it separate from his real life so it wouldn't distract him from his schoolwork. It was a plausible story. It was shameful, irresponsible, but it was containable. It was a problem they could solve with therapy and financial controls. It was a story Eleanor desperately wanted to be true. She clung to it like a life raft. A gambling addiction was something she could understand. It was a flaw, not a fundamental corruption of his character. "Oh, Liam," she breathed, relief and sorrow warring within her. "Why didn't you tell us? We could have helped you." But David wasn't buying it. He was looking at the notebook, at the strings of alphanumeric characters. "These aren't poker sites, Liam. These are crypto wallets. And these acronyms, they're not gambling terms. This is something else." Liam's composure finally cracked. A flicker of panic in his eyes. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. "It's complicated, you wouldn't understand." "Then explain it to me," David said, his voice dangerously quiet. The confrontation escalated, voices rising, the years of unspoken tension and pressure finally erupting. Eleanor was caught in the crossfire, pleading with both of them. "Please stop. We're a family, we can fix this," but they were past that. David was pushing for a truth that Liam was terrified to give. Liam, cornered, fell back on the one weapon he had left, their own ambition for him. "You want to know what this is?" he shouted, his voice cracking with a rage that seemed to come from a deep, hidden well. "This is the pressure. This is what you wanted. Georgetown, the perfect grades, the perfect life. It costs money. It takes time. I did what I had to do to keep it all going, to keep you both happy." It was a cruel, brilliant deflection. He was turning their love and ambition into a cage he had been forced to escape. He was making them complicit in his secrets. He stormed out of the room, slamming his bedroom door, leaving them with the echoes of his accusation and the sickening feeling that he might, in some small, terrible way, be right. In the days that followed, the Vance home transformed. The pristine, welcoming space became a Cold War battleground. A fragile truce was negotiated, based on Liam's partial, sanitized confession. He promised to stop gambling. He surrendered the cash, which David locked in their home safe. He allowed them to put parental controls on his laptop, a humiliating concession for an 18-year-old that he accepted with unnerving grace. Eleanor threw herself into finding a therapist who specialized in addiction, making calls, scheduling appointments, channeling her fear into action. She was trying to fit this terrifying, jagged new reality into a manageable framework. It was a problem with a solution. Her son was sick, but he could be healed. Her family was broken, but it could be mended. David, however, remained shrouded in a grim, quiet skepticism. He watched Liam, not with the hopeful eyes of a mother, but with the discerning gaze of an auditor who knows the books have been cooked. He saw that Liam's compliance was too easy, too smooth. He saw the furtive glances at his real phone, the way he would abruptly end calls when one of them entered the room. He wasn't a prodigal son returning to the fold. He was an operative who had been compromised, now working under surveillance, biding his time. The invisible threat that had been a vague anxiety now began to take on a more tangible shape. One evening, as David was pulling into the driveway, he noticed a dark sedan parked down the street. It was nondescript, with tinted windows, and it didn't belong to any of their neighbors. It was there the next day and the day after. When he tried to walk toward it, the engine started and it quietly pulled away. Coincidence, perhaps, but it felt like a silent message, a warning. Then came the package. It was a small, padded envelope left on their doorstep, with no postage and no return address. Liam's name was written on it in neat, block letters. Liam saw it first. He snatched it up before either of them could react, his face pale with a fear so stark it stole Eleanor's breath. He retreated to his room, and they heard the lock click. Later, he would claim it was just a book he'd ordered from an online seller, but his hands trembled as he said it. His paranoia became a palpable presence in the house. He started double-checking the locks on the doors and windows. He would flinch at the sound of a car backfiring. He stopped going out altogether, claiming he needed to study for finals, but it was clear he was hiding. The carefully constructed walls of their suburban sanctuary now felt terrifyingly thin. Whatever Liam was involved in, it wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a danger, and it was no longer confined to the dark corners of the internet. It was outside their house, watching and waiting. The fear was no longer for Liam's future, for his soul. It was for his life. David could no longer live with the calculated lies and the suffocating tension. The sight of the strange car, the fear in his son's eyes. It was the final push he needed to tear down the facade and find the real truth, no matter how ugly. He was an accountant. He dealt in facts and figures, in verifiable truths. He took the small, black notebook, the one object Liam hadn't been able to explain away, and began his own quiet, desperate investigation. He spent his nights in his home office, long after Eleanor and Liam were asleep, the glow of his monitor painting his face in stark shades of blue and white. He started with the alphanumeric strings Liam had dismissed as complicated a few hours on specialized forums, and David learned the language his son spoke fluently. They were cryptocurrency wallet addresses. With the right software, their public transactions could be traced. He followed the money. It was like descending into a digital rabbit hole, a world of shadows and encrypted data. He saw vast sums of digital currency moving in and out of the wallets listed in Liam's notebook. It flowed from sources linked to dark web marketplaces, forums where stolen credit card numbers, social security numbers, and entire personal identities were bought and sold by the thousands. The acronyms in the notebook started to make sense. They weren't gambling terms. They were code names for different data sets. SSN Balkan E for social security numbers from the Northeast. CC Plat EU for platinum-level credit cards from Europe. Liam wasn't a gambler. He was a broker. He was a trafficker in stolen lives. David felt a wave of nausea. This was his son, the boy he had taught to ride a bike, the boy who had once cried when their pet hamster died. How could that boy be connected to this vast, cold, criminal enterprise? He kept digging, driven by a horrified determination. He found mentions of a figure who seemed to be at the center of this network, a handle that appeared in encrypted chats associated with the transactions. Helios was the buyer, the director, the one who gave the orders. The one Liam was working for, or with. The distinction was terrifyingly unclear. The final piece fell into place when David took the burner phone to a specialist he knew through a corporate security contact, a man who specialized in data recovery. For a hefty, off-the-books fee, the specialist cracked the phone. The text messages were a revelation of horror. They were communications between Liam and Helios and others in the network. They were terse, professional, and chillingly casual. Instructions for data drops, negotiations over price, warnings about security protocols, and one recent terrifying exchange. Asset compromised. Liam had written, "Parents are suspicious. Have to lay low." The reply from Helios was instantaneous and devoid of any empathy. "Contain it. Liabilities will be neutralized. You know the protocol, liabilities will be neutralized." The words echoed in David's mind. Liabilities. That was what he and Eleanor were. They weren't parents. They were a problem to be solved. The strange car, the package, it was all part of the protocol. They were putting pressure on Liam, testing him, reminding him of the rules of the game he had chosen to play. David printed out the transaction histories, the chat logs, the evidence of a life so far removed from their own it felt like a grotesque parody. He laid it all out on his desk, the white pages a testament to his son's profound betrayal. The truth was no longer a suspicion. It was a stack of paper an inch thick, and it was heavier than anything he had ever held. He waited until the next evening. He told Eleanor he needed to speak with her and Liam together, in his office. He locked the door behind them. The room felt like a courtroom. David sat behind his desk, the damning printouts stacked neatly in front of him. Eleanor and Liam sat opposite, the tension between them a physical force. Eleanor looked confused, anxious. Liam looked wary, his eyes darting towards the papers on the desk. He knew. "Your story about online gambling," David began, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "It was a good lie, Liam. Believable, contained. But it's over." He slid the first stack of papers across the desk. "The cryptocurrency transaction records. This is not poker. This is money laundering. Proceeds from the sale of stolen financial data." He slid over another stack. "The decoded acronyms. You're not betting on teams. You're selling people's lives, their identities." To the highest bidder, Liam stared at the papers, his face a frozen mask. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked from the papers to her son, her eyes wide with disbelief and horror. "David, no, it can't be." "Oh, it can be," David said, his voice hardening. He pushed the final stack across the desk. The encrypted text messages. "And this is your boss, or your partner, Helios, the one who told you to contain your parents, the one who refers to your mother and me as liabilities that will be neutralized." He let the words hang in the air, each one a hammer blow. He finally looked directly at his son. The cool, collected debater was gone. The perfect son was gone. In his place was a pale, trembling 18-year-old, his carefully constructed world collapsing around him in real time. "Tell me about Helios, Liam," David demanded. "Tell me who you've invited into our lives." Liam finally broke. A strangled sob escaped his lips. The dam of lies, of secrets, of pressure and performance that he had been building for years finally burst. The tears streamed down his face, silent and convulsive. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. "I'm sorry," he choked out, the words muffled. "I'm so sorry." The confession, when it came, was a torrent of shame, fear, and a twisted kind of pride. He had started small, using his coding skills to find vulnerabilities in small-time websites, selling user data for a few $100s in crypto. It was a game, a challenge. It was a way to have something that was just his, something his parents couldn't plan or control or take credit for. It was a source of money and power in a life where he felt he had none. Then Helios had found him, recruited him. Helios had seen his talent and given him a bigger stage to play on. Suddenly, he wasn't just a petty hacker. He was part of something sophisticated, powerful, and anonymous. He was respected for his skills, not his grades. The money was intoxicating, but it was the validation that was truly addictive. He had used the money to buy the things he thought a successful person should have, the best laptop, the best tech, to look the part his parents had always wanted him to play, but he'd done it on his own terms. He was a success in two different worlds. But the deeper he got, the more trapped he became. Helios wasn't just a boss, he was a gatekeeper. He knew Liam's real name, his address, everything about him. Quitting wasn't an option. The moment he became a risk, he would become a target. And now, because of his parents' discovery, he was a risk. "I didn't know how to stop," he wept, looking at Eleanor. His eyes pleading for an understanding she didn't know how to give. "It just got bigger and bigger. I was so scared. I was scared of them. And I was scared of disappointing you." Eleanor felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Her son, her perfect son, had been living in a private hell, and she had been on the other side of his bedroom door, polishing his trophies, completely oblivious. The life she had built wasn't a masterpiece. It was a cage, and her son had found a desperate, catastrophic way to feel free within it. The aftermath of the confession was a new kind of silence. Not the tense, angry silence of before, but a heavy, grief-stricken stillness. The truth was out. A venomous creature uncoiled in the center of their living room, and no one knew how to approach it. The question of what to do next was a chasm that threatened to swallow them whole. Go to the police? It was the lawful, moral thing to do, but it would mean handing their son over to a system that would chew him up and spit him out. It would mean exposing him to Helios, a faceless entity who had already threatened to neutralize them. Liam, in a state of complete psychological collapse, was terrified of this option. "They'll find me," he whispered, rocking back and forth in his chair. "They'll find me in prison. Or they'll come for you." The alternative was just as unthinkable: to try and handle it themselves. To somehow extract their son from a sophisticated criminal network, to hide him, to protect him from forces they couldn't possibly comprehend. It was a fantasy, a desperate parent's delusion. Their home, once a symbol of their success, became their prison. They drew the blinds, double-checked the locks. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that passed on the street, sent a jolt of adrenaline through them. Eleanor couldn't eat. She couldn't sleep. She would sit in the dark, watching her son, this stranger who wore her son's face, and she would weep. She was mourning the boy she thought she had, and she was terrified for the boy she now knew. David took charge, his pragmatism a shield against the overwhelming emotion. He took away all of Liam's electronics. He took his car keys. Liam was now a prisoner in his own home, and they were his wardens. The arguments between Eleanor and David were quiet, whispered, and brutal. Eleanor, driven by a primal, maternal instinct, wanted to run, to pack their bags, take the money from the safe, and just disappear. "We can start over," she pleaded. "Somewhere they'll never find us." David, his face etched with exhaustion, knew it was impossible. "They're not cartoon villains, Eleanor. These are serious, organized criminals. They operate globally. There is nowhere to run. Our only leverage, our only chance, is to cooperate with the authorities." The impasse was absolute. To Eleanor, calling the police felt like a betrayal of her son. To David, not calling them felt like a suicidal act of denial. They were trapped, paralyzed by two impossible choices, while the invisible threat outside their door felt more and more real. The choice, in the end, was not theirs to make. It happened a week after the confession. It was just after dawn, the sky a pale, hazy gray. A fleet of black SUVs descended on their quiet suburban street, silent and swift. There was no siren, just the harsh, sudden slam of car doors. Then, the splintering crash of their front door being forced open by a battering ram. Men in tactical gear, armed with assault rifles, flooded their home, shouting commands. "FBI! Hands where I can see them! Get on the ground!" Eleanor screamed. David instinctively pulled her behind him. They were forced to the floor in their own hallway, the cold wood pressing against their faces. They saw agents swarm up the stairs. They heard Liam cry out, a sound of pure terror. A few moments later, he was brought down in handcuffs, wearing only his pajamas. His face was ashen, his eyes wide and vacant with shock. He wouldn't look at them. He couldn't. As they led him out of the house, past the shattered frame of their front door and the wreckage of their perfect life, one of the lead agents stopped in front of David and Eleanor. "David Vance?" he asked. David, still on the floor, nodded numbly. "Your son is being taken into federal custody. He and you are incredibly lucky. His associate, the one you know as Helios, decided to cut his losses. He's been feeding us information on his entire network for the past month in exchange for a deal. He gave us your son to prove his sincerity." The agent's words were like ice water. They hadn't been stalked by Helios. They had been observed, watched. Their family crisis had been a piece on a chessboard, a strategic move in a much larger game. Helios had never intended to harm them. Liam was the liability, and he had been neutralized, just as the text message had promised. not with violence, but with a betrayal so complete, so cold, that it was a violence all its own. Liam had been sacrificed by the very world he had sought validation from. As the cars pulled away, taking their son with them, Eleanor looked around at her beautiful home, now filled with armed strangers, its sanctity violated, its harmony shattered forever. The consequence had arrived, not as a shadowy threat in the night, but in the clear, harsh light of day, wearing a government-issued jacket. Years have passed since that morning. The house on the tree-lined street was sold long ago. It was impossible to stay, to live among the ghosts of a life that had been revealed as an illusion. David and Eleanor moved to a small, anonymous apartment in a different city. Their relationship, fractured by the crisis, slowly, painfully, began to heal. It was a new kind of love, forged not in the shared dream of perfection, but in the shared reality of loss and survival. There are no more family photos on the walls. The past is a country to which they can never return. Liam, in exchange for his own cooperation, received a reduced sentence. He served 3 years in a minimum security federal prison. He is out now, a young man in his mid-20s, trying to build a life from the rubble of his youth. He is estranged from the digital world he once mastered. He works a simple job. He is quiet, reserved, and carries a sadness that may never leave him. His relationship with his parents is tentative, marked by the vast, unspoken landscape of their shared trauma. The love is there, but it is a scarred and cautious thing. We look at stories like this, at the wreckage of a family like the Vances, and we search for a simple lesson. We want to blame the parents for their pressure, or the son for his deception, or the technology for its seductive power. And they all bear a measure of responsibility. But the truth, as always, is more complex. The story of Liam Vance is a cautionary tale for an age where lives can be lived in parallel, one in the physical world of family dinners and report cards, and another in the ethereal, anonymous world behind a screen. It's a story about the immense, silent pressure we place on our children to succeed, to build a flawless resume from birth, without ever stopping to ask if the foundation of their own identity is secure. We celebrate their achievements, their trophies, their acceptance letters, but we often fail to look into their eyes and see the exhaustion, the fear of failure, the desperate longing to be valued for who they are, not just for what they accomplish. Liam's secret life was not just a rebellion. It was a desperate attempt to build a sense of self-worth in a place where his parents' expectations couldn't reach him. He sought power and validation in the shadows because he felt he had none in the light. So, what do we take from this? Perhaps it is a reminder to look past the frames on the wall, past the perfect smiles in the photographs, and to see the people we love in their full, complicated, and sometimes frightening humanity. It is an appeal to create spaces within our families where vulnerability is not a weakness, and where failure is not a catastrophe. It is a call to ask the difficult questions, to listen to the silences, and to have the courage to hear an answer we may not be prepared for. Because behind every closed door, in every pristine suburban home, there are hidden truths. And the greatest tragedy is not their discovery, but the failure to create a home where those truths, no matter how dark, feel safe enough to be spoken aloud before they fester into a force that can tear a world apart.